everybody for coming tonight. My name is Jeremy Anderson. I'm the current president of the Worthington Tea Party. And I want to thank everybody for coming out, especially those that may not consider themselves necessarily aligned with the Tea Party. We wanted to open this up. We thought this was a very valuable discussion for the entire community. And it's something that I think most of us will agree that whether you're liberal, conservative, education of our kids is something that's very important. We may have different ideas about how to accomplish that, but our end goal is genuine. So tonight we did want to welcome a number of individuals that are responsible for curriculum in our district. Dr. Tucker will be here at some point here this evening. I have Jennifer Ween, she's the Director of Academic Achievement. Jamie Lusher, Nancy Massman,
yes,
and Nancy Charlton. And so they'll each speak on their respective areas of the curriculum. We pass out some handouts and a card. We're going to try to get through as many questions as we can. If we're not able to, time doesn't permit, they've asked if you just put your question and your name and contact information. And if we can't get to it tonight, someone from the office will get a call back to you. So I also would like to recognize Mark Scher. He did a lot of legwork in helping me put this meeting on together. Mark, you may see him coming to your door over the next couple of months. He is up for re-election. He's on our school board. So, but I do want to make sure it's known that he did a lot of legwork helping me get this put together. So thanks a lot, Mark. Well, I will go ahead at this point. I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. Jennifer, hand it over to Jen. Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Well, thank you, everybody. And as Jeremy pointed out, the one thing we do have in common, that was my joke of the night, is that we all care about our kids' education and certainly the health of our community, our local community, our state community, our national community, and our international community too. So we appreciate, whether we always agree or not, we appreciate every single one of you for your caring and concern about our students in Worthington and our curriculum. There is nothing we like to talk more about than curriculum and instruction, so thank you for the opportunity to come tonight. I personally am going to try to stick to my script. For those of you who know me, I like to talk, and I don't want to be doing all the talking here, so I apologize if I occasionally look down here, but I'm going to try to stay on task here. And we did have a couple technical difficulties, so this presentation actually will be posted on our district website, and it will have a video and actually a presentation by our science curriculum coordinator. He was wonderful to videotape himself, and then my computer didn't have the program he used to create the little video, so you know how that works. But that will be on the website, so you can see that. So first of all, as all good teachers, we like to start with a little context. And the context I want to give you is somewhat of the history of curriculum, not just in Worthington, but nationally in Ohio. Prior to 1983, public education was known to have somewhat of a cottage industry. And what we mean by that is we not only had our own local curriculum, but even the individual schools somewhat did their own thing. We were entrepreneurs, so to speak. And that was the norm and the educational norm of how the schools operated. But there's this thing that got published called The Nation at Risk, and I'm sure you heard of that report. And it was somewhat condemning of public education in saying that we weren't keeping up with international benchmarks and international education. It was a very critical report, and public schools nationally, at the state level and at the local level, began responding to that. At that time, what emerged, what was known as competency-based education. And in that, states began developing their own models for what was called competency-based education. In other words, we determined first what we wanted our students to learn, and then we worked backwards. That wasn't received very well either, and that went somewhat by the wayside. And then around the year 2000, the Governor's Commission on School Success got into full force, and they started looking at this whole issue of internationally benchmarking and are we competing with other countries. And then in 2001, a couple things happened simultaneously. No Child Left Behind was passed, and those of us who have been in education for very long know that really as the start of standards, accountability, testing, and that is well rooted within our system at this point in time. But also the American Diploma Project, and I want to read this because these organizations fed into the American Diploma Project. Achieve Incorporated, the Education Trust, the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation, and the National Alliance of Business. They began studying what indeed are those common core standards that every student needs to have in order to be competitive locally, statewide, nationally, and internationally. And that's why they were called the Common Core. They were common for everybody, and they were the core standards. So the American Diploma Project started that work. And then in beginning in 2001, Ohio started implementing new standards. And those are the ones that are currently in place really up until this school year when we pass new standards. The American Diploma Project then went into full force and started working with states on what is called a standards alignment. And that's where the state looked at what their local needs were, and they aligned with the common standards that were developed by the Diploma Project. And then in 2010, Ohio adopted new standards. Why do we need to change? There's a lot written on that. You can get multiple points of view, but it really comes down to these 5 bullets. First of all, the urgency to close the gap between what students need to know for post-secondary success, and that includes both colleges and universities as well as the workplace, and what states require. There's a huge disparity, as you know, that really sprang out of No Child Left Behind between what states expect in terms of standards. And the Business Roundtable was a huge impetus in really pushing states in this direction to increase rigor and raise the standards. It was also perceived that the United States was losing ground in comparison to other countries around the world. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, called NAEP, has been implemented and given in our local district and across the state, across the nation, and also internationally for several years. It's those results that cause people to have that perception. Also, simply, 21st century school success requires 21st century schools, and for the longest time we were talking about we got to get ready for the 21st century, and then all of a sudden here we are, it's 2013. Well, the 21st century is here. Also, the huge shifts, and I'm sure you've read a lot about this, huge shifts in where the jobs are that require different skills, knowledge, and dispositions than what our traditional educational system prepared things. And then, honestly, technology changes everything. That is a game changer. So in Ohio, the last time we adopted standards were the English Language Arts and Math in 2001, so those are well over a decade old. Science and Social Studies in 2002, and then Foreign Language, Fine Arts, and Technology. So you can understand why our legislators then passed legislation that said no later than June 30th of 2010, we will implement new curriculum that has an emphasis on coherence, and by that means there's good articulation from K to 12. It's not that you learn this at kindergarten, then a separate set of things at first, and a separate set of things at second. It's well articulated. It's focused. So in other words, instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, it should be an inch wide and a mile deep. And then rigor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, for grades K through 12 in English Language Arts, Math, Science, and Social Studies. So the Ohio Board of Education was required by law to adopt the new curriculum in those areas. So what were these standards or the criteria or the parameters that Ohio set forth in terms of designing new curriculum? First of all, they wanted standards that were fewer, clearer, and higher. And by higher, they don't mean more homework, more to do, but they work at a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy or thinking skills. So instead of just knowledge level, we're going up to the application level, the creativity level. Also that they are aligned with college and work expectations. Both the Business Roundtable and colleges were telling us that students were coming in to their entry level of whether college or work unprepared academically as well as to handle the technology. They are internationally benchmarked, and on the Ohio Department of Education website there is a very good and comprehensive report that talks about what that means as well as what countries they used because they had certain criteria for choosing what countries. Also that the content and the application was both rigorous and took the students to a higher order of thinking. It built upon the strengths and lessons of current state standards. It includes the identified 21st century skills, and it's evidence or research based. So in other words, they didn't just put something in because it was a whim of someone on the committee. There had to be research behind it that said this is a standard that has been implemented, well met, and prepared students. So internationally benchmarking looked at high-performing countries, and I did jot down here in terms of what they used, which countries they referred to. And for Ohio, we looked at Australia, England, Finland, Hong Kong, Ireland, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, Ontario, Canada, and Singapore. And there's a couple reasons. One, they were looking for countries that served a diverse population of learners. The United States is one of the few countries that educates all, and our expectation is we educate all through graduation, and graduation means prepared to enter the workforce or enter college. So those were the countries they looked at because they felt like they are most aligned with the population of learners in our public schools. They looked at the standards. Were they rigorous? Did they meet that criteria that I talked about in the slide before? Teacher effects, meaning what were the instructional practices? Because you can't adopt a curriculum that's more rigorous, expect students to think and apply skills, and then teachers teach in the same way that they taught before. That just doesn't work. So is that assumed in the curriculum? And then learning conditions, and by that it means, does it have supports in it so that students who are having trouble learning are able to access the curriculum, as well as students who might be gifted or accelerated also have the opportunity to move behind. So those three things. And then Ohio's job was what's the best fit for Ohio. So also within the legislation was that our standards need to allow each student to be prepared for post-secondary instruction and the workplace for success in the 21st century. So that was Ohio's legislative expectations. The other component that Ohio felt was very important within the new standards is what calls 21st century skills. And I put this up here because this represents an organization that both Worthington Schools and the state of Ohio adopted as our framework for what does that mean. So if you go to this website, you will be able to click on each one of those little texts, and it will take you to curriculum and what that means. Well, this is also what the Common Core used in terms of defining what 21st century skills were within the Common Core. So right there, there's an alignment between Common Core, State of Ohio, and the visionary, forward-thinking Worthington Schools, because we too adopted this, our Board of Education adopted this, I lose track of time, but maybe I'll say 5 years ago. Why Common Core? Great little video that I can't access because we couldn't get the internet up and going. It's a 3-minute video. I encourage you to go to our district website, and if you click on academic achievement, on the left column will be a link to the standards, and you'll be able to play this video. And it's a really nice, simple video for every person that can understand why we need those common standards. And I'm going to pause right here and introduce Dr. Tucker.
What a great time.
So.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
I see quite a few familiar and friendly faces here. I remember several months ago we were speaking with many of you at the Tea Party regarding the levy, and I want to thank each of you for your support and the questions that you raised regarding the successful operating levy as well as the bond issue. Jennifer and our other folks here from our curriculum department are here tonight as educators to help answer some of the questions and concerns that you have. And that's really special. I'm running about 10 minutes late. I had communicated to Mark and to Jennifer that I was upholding a commitment that I made to a husband and wife who have committed resources and time to our district in supporting our food pantry. But they're also big supporters like you, big supporters of the education that we have here in Worthington, and like you, they want the absolute best. And so tonight we'll talk about, as educators, not as politicians, we'll talk about the Common Core, and again try to answer some of the questions that you may have, questions that you raise, and we want this to be a friendly, intimate affair tonight. And as many of you know me, and certainly know Jennifer and the Nancy's that we have here, our two Nancy's, and Vicki and other folks here, and Dr. Bowers as well. You know we are committed to all now 9,508 kids here in the district, and we will not in any way jeopardize the type of education that our kids need to be ready for careers and to be ready for higher education. So, Jennifer, I'll step down now and I'll have some comments.
And you'll be here to help
I'll be here the
answer
whole
questions?
time, the whole time.
So
So thank you.
You can sit and catch your breath.
Thank you.
So, I took you back to this slide because I wanted to remind you of what the expectation of the parameter was for Ohio standards as they look to adopt. Remember, it says college and career ready. And then I want to jump to the vision of the Common Core. All students should graduate from high school prepared for the demands of post-secondary education, meaningful careers, and effective citizenship. So do you hear some alignment there in terms of the expectations of the two? So what is Common Core? First of all, it's a voluntary state-led alignment that resulted in a Common Core of standards that all students must meet to be college and career ready. And I know there's some belief that Ohio or Worthington schools just adopted the Common Core, but that really is incorrect. In fact, we worked with the state of Ohio. We had a member of our administrative team, Cindy Westover, who preceded Jamie Lusher, who actually worked on the writing team. And she sometimes came back very frustrated. There were many iterations of what Ohio wanted versus what was in the Common Core, but their job was to write what they thought was best. And then we had lots of opportunities, not just with English language arts, but with math and social studies and science, to give input into what we saw. And honestly, we did really see a response to the input. Many changes were made. So it's organic, meaning that it grew from its original state, and it was state-led alignment. So while the Ohio Diploma Project may have developed the original Common Core, the job of the state, of each state that wanted to look at them, was then to align its needs and expectations with the Common Core, not match it, but align. It reflects the reality of the world. So it's not only looking at what prepares students to be competitive in Ohio, in the United States, but also internationally. We talked about it's internationally benchmarked. It integrates the 21st century skills and respects the role of state and local decision-making in education. So what are these Ohio new learning standards? So aligned with the Common Core, Ohio developed and then adopted new standards in English language arts. There's also a literacy component in science, social studies, and technical subjects. And that's one of the shifts you'll hear about from the other curriculum leaders. And then also in mathematics. In addition to align to those curriculums, Ohio also developed standards in science with, again, linking back up to the literacy, and social studies linking back up to the literacy. And we also are working with physical education, fine arts, foreign language, entrepreneurship, and business education. So all of that is also going on at the same time. And I put this up here so that because one of the main differences in this curriculum and sometimes it's hard to get this across, is it's highly integrated. The intent is that they overlap, that they integrate, they support one another. Because when we get out into the real world, we don't go to our job and say, I'm going to do my English language arts part of my job now, and then over here, in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to do the math part of my job. It is all integrated. We need to be able to communicate, speaking, listening, and writing. You'll hear some more about that. But along with the content changes, there are also what we call instructional shifts. And this is really important because, as I mentioned earlier, you can't expect students to learn more rigorous content that's more relevant, they apply it at a higher level, unless teachers are making some shifts in their instructional practices. So let's talk about what those are. And again, each one of the curriculum leaders will talk a little bit about what that shift looks like in their discipline. The first shift is that students need to be able to develop a deep understanding of the content and effectively apply the learning within and across disciplines. So if I'm learning social studies, I'm also learning how to speak, write, listen, and effectively communicate my thoughts, my ideas, my positions. So that's a very important component, and I'm expected to understand it deeply because I can't explain it or talk about it unless I understand it. Students are also expected to be able to craft responses based on evidence, including demonstrating their understanding, explaining their reasoning or their understanding, and justifying a position. And then use technology appropriately. I love that word. It should be in capital letters, appropriately, strategically and ethically in academic and real-world settings. And I'll tell you guys, there's nothing more challenging to us right now than how to do that. As you know, if you have children and grandchildren, technology just dominates their lives, and helping them understand how to use it in a way that promotes their thinking and learning, promotes their social and emotional health. It is a great challenge, and that challenge isn't going to go away. It's just going to become greater and greater for us. So one of the first instructional shift, and you hear us talk about rigor, relevance, and relationships all the time. And what does that mean? That's educational jargon, and you know we love those kinds of words. But what it really means is that we are developing a curriculum that takes students to a higher level than it currently does. And that is coherent K-12. So when you think about math, what we learn in kindergarten is helping us build for what we need to learn in first grade, which is helping us build. And if you look at the current standards, it really isn't at least that apparent. Now, a good math teacher will make those connections back and forth, but it isn't apparent in the curriculum. And again, that sophistication of skills is students need to be able to apply it to real-world problems and real-world situations. So it's not enough if you learn it if you can't use it in some functional way. Applicable to academic and real-world problems. This generation of learners, you know, my grandson's entering freshman at Thomas Worthington High School, and I think about the societal and economic and work challenges that are going to face him when he graduates from high school and hopefully college versus what I had to face. It was very easy to get a job, and you know, the world was my oyster as long as I got an education, and it's very different. And it needs to foster collaboration and connections across the discipline. So it's not enough that they just go to their social studies class that 45 minutes. They have to see what the connection is to the other disciplines. So that's what we mean when we say rigor, relevance, and relationships. And the other thing is, and this is very important because I think we can all relate to this, we are no longer promoting a learning and teaching style of sit, get, and regurgitate. That gets us through school, but it doesn't prepare us for post-secondary life. So what we're trying to do through these instructional shifts, as well as the changes in content, is promote a learning cycle that causes students to engage in the content, to explore that content, to be able to explain their learning, extend their learning, and evaluate what they're learning and why. And again, you think about that, what that might look like in a classroom, it's going to look very different than what we have today. The other component that's in Common Core and is a critical expectation in Ohio standards is this access to diverse learners. And we're talking about our most challenged learners in terms of reaching up to the grade level standards, as well as our learners that may be above it and continuing to be challenged. So within the Ohio iteration of our standards, you will see in the Worthington curriculum, and our Worthington curriculum is now posted on the website, so you can see K through high school. We have reference to how will we provide access to our challenged learners and our gifted learners. In Ohio, again, we love that educational jargon. You know, we call it universal design for learning, but if you want to go to that YouTube link, you can learn more about what that means. But that's a critical component and an expectation. Before it was an expectation of the teacher, now it's an expectation of the curriculum, and the curriculum should enable the teacher to do that more readily.
I interrupt you just real quick. I'll let the folks that are staying enough, you guys can come over and sit down.
The other component, and we aren't going to talk a lot about this tonight, but when we have more information, we'll be happy to come back and talk about it, is what was called the next generation assessments. And I know this is an area that creates a lot of angst. So Ohio has joined a consortium called CARP to develop assessments in English language arts and math, and they should be operational this school year. I think Dr. Tucker will shares with my skepticism about that, but we shall see. And those are the grade levels. And in 2014-15, we will move away from the Ohio graduation test to what are called end-of-course exams. So students won't take those exams until they take the course and they're ready to do that. Then also beginning in the fall of 2014, so next year's 10th graders will take the college career readiness exam, which is the PSAT.
Many of you are familiar with it. I'm sure you took it in 11th grade, and you probably took it as practice in 10th grade, but it's PSAT has been around for a while. It's the little brother, little sister of the SAT.
So that test is fully aligned with college readiness. So students and parents in grade 10 then will get some really critical information about where they are in that journey to being college ready, and depending on what college or university they want to attend. And then also, we have state-developed assessments in science, social studies, operational 2014-15, and also includes the end-of-course exams. So we are fully implemented in our curriculum this school year, and as we get more information about the park exams and the state exams, we'll be talking more about that. So at this time, I'd like to invite Mrs. Massman.
All right. Well, the first thing we're going to do is a little reflection. When you're thinking back to your school experience in mathematics, what did you enjoy about that? Was there a time that you enjoyed mathematics?
You can be honest here.
You don't have to answer. You can reflect. What was your worst memory of mathematics? I can think of a lot of, and these are two questions when I was in the classroom that I would ask my students at the very beginning of the year, because I wanted to get their predispositions to what they think what's going to happen in class. And I will venture to guess that there were a lot more of the worst memories at times than there were best memories. Do you ever joke about your math ability or your lack thereof? Well, I'm never going to do that. Wait till Dad gets home to get help. Moms. They used to say, you're going to be the moms that can help their students at home. What's different for where we're going now in mathematics is attitude. We want to develop in our students an attitude about mathematics and an efficacy about mathematics that they can do math. Somewhere in elementary school, we start losing children, and the gap gets wider, and they lose. Well before the standards, that we have adopted the Common Core standards. I had the opportunity to work with some curriculum folks from Upper Arlington, and we were saying, where is the problem here? Because all we do is create more and more gaps with children, and we don't have the time to get that caught up. A child in kindergarten is 15 minutes behind. If we don't attend to that, by grade 4, they're years behind. We get a little higher, we go into high school, they don't get caught up. Are we getting them ready for college and career? No, no. Who do we need to be paying attention to is we need to pay attention to our children coming in kindergarten. And so when I was working with Deborah Rucker and Karen Borman, they had put together a math assessment called the Developmental Math Assessment. And we were looking at how do kids develop number and number sense. We use that term all the time, number sense. Well, what does that really mean? It's more than I know my facts. It's I know how numbers operate. And so we are attending to, and what happened with the Common Core is that there is a great focus on number, so that we are working with our children starting from kindergarten and attending to how do you develop a sense of number. The underlying principle is that we can all do mathematics because we can all think. Now, there are a couple corollaries that some of my colleagues have put together. It says, the strategies that attempt to remove thinking from learning are bound to fail in the long run. I have had phone calls from high school pre-calculus teachers who are trying to teach synthetic division. And they're saying, these kids don't know how to divide. They could do division. They can manipulate and do the operation. But they had no understanding. This is they got the right answer, they know how to get the answer, but they weren't able to transfer that information. They were very good procedurally. Now, since all of us can think about mathematics, we're going to do a little problem. There's paper at your chairs, and you can use the note card, and we can give you a new note card. I don't want you to share the answer just yet. I want you to see if you can come up with an answer. I bet you thought it real quick. That's good. There's some that can. If I were giving this problem to a third grader, what would a third grader need to know? What would they need to know? Well, first of all, they'd have to know what a pig and a chicken were, weren't they? Now, we kind of smile at that, but we have students in our, hey, Jamie, how many different languages do we now have represented in our school district? How many? 23. So if you're a student sitting in a classroom and you're talking about a chicken, and English isn't your first language, you would need to show a chicken. You might even give little examples of chickens out in these problems. They'd have to know what a pig was. Oh, okay. So that a chicken has 2 legs and a pig has 4 legs. We know there are 12 animals, right? So a child could use the manipulative. Some of you may have drawn a picture, right? Thinking about what you just did. You may have seen this as the dreaded story problem, because I could see the faces. Some of you had that face, like, oh, Lord, a story problem. And that was one of those worst memory things, you know? Because we didn't stop and really explain everything that was going on in the problem here. And what's the foundation? We need to know there were 12 animals, and some of them have 2 legs, and some of them have 4 legs. I could give this problem in an algebra class. They would set this up as a simultaneous equation, a linear equation, simultaneous linear equation. So the idea is that we're also exposing the mathematics. This is what we call multiple points of access. You could do this, and you could think about it in different ways. There's not just one right way. Some people said, well, if I went with 4 legs and all 12 of them were the pigs, then I'd have 48. No, that's not going to work. Well, then I could go with there are 24 because there are 2, and then, well, that's not going to work either. So I have to do some trading away. My point is, it's multiple points of access. If I asked you to share out, when I've heard people say, well, is the process more important than the answer? Absolutely not. It's not more important, but it's really important for our toolboxes, for our children, to have different ways of thinking about things and hearing what other people are thinking about. Oh, I didn't think about that problem that way. Oh, okay, maybe the next time I have that might be a more efficient way than the way I was doing the problem. So we are talking about collaboration and conversation in our classrooms. We are sitting down with our children. I just met with the first grade team at one of our elementaries. And they sit down daily and interview kids. Well, how did you come up with that answer? Often kids will give the right answer, but have the faulty thinking about it. Or it only works, that strategy only works in a limited way. So what the Common Core is doing is it's giving us, one, a clearer picture of what children are supposed to know in a developmentally appropriate way. So our focus on, for example, in our curriculum in the past, we've had our second graders finding the median in part of their data unit. Well, they could manipulate the numbers, but in a second grader's world, where is that relevant? That's where that relevance piece comes. The foundation of the Common Core in mathematics is focused on these 8 mathematical practices. And you'll see that number 1 and number 6 are probably the 2 most important because they're pervasive. When we say that we want the children to make sense of problems and persevere, some of us have given up. It's like, oh, I can't do this. That's where that efficacy piece is. We have to help develop that perseverance and the tools to do that. Number 6, attend to precision. That's getting the answer. It's also speaking about the language of mathematics accurately. You know, we're not talking about let's contrive things. And I've had that problem with certain things that we've been doing. We've made up names and flip-flop fractions and all these things that's not a mathematically appropriate vocabulary. Let's talk to them about the vocabulary. I've often said if kindergartners can talk about Tyrannosaurus Rex and have that big word, they can talk about those things in mathematics. So these 8 practices are what the framework to which we put the content. So they're emphasized from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. Now, how some of these things look in a kindergarten class is not going to look the same in a 9th grade class. But the teachers were talking about the kind of questions that we ask to help develop. We want children to become mathematical thinkers, not just math doers. Now, we've added this because I like it. And we're talking about Worthington curriculum. I mean, we can talk about the Common Core, and I'm talking about the Common Core, but I'm also talking about what I know, and I know us in Worthington. I know what we do here. And we want to take those 8 practices a step further. We want kids to be able to solve problems in novel ways and pose new mathematical questions of interest to investigate. And we're working with our gifted learners with that. That's going to be a major focus for them. I heard Jennifer, and you're going to hear some repetitiveness in our presentations in some of the language, is we don't want it just to be everybody the same. We want students to be developing their creativity around and using mathematics in that way. You heard in Jennifer's presentation, focus, coherence, rigor. She used all 3 of those terms, and that's because it's important all the way across the board. Focus. We're looking at those key ideas. I heard her reference mile wide, inch deep curriculum. I got to cover it, I got to cover it. Maybe you had that experience in class, the teacher hurried up and said, okay, we're good, we're done, we did it, and you were clueless. It's like, well, we spent 15 minutes on it, that's all. And we're looking at what does go deeper mean. So at each of our grade levels and in each of the courses in the high school, there are big ideas. And you can imagine, as I said earlier, number is going to be very important. Now, mathematics is not, as I heard Jennifer reference, integration. Mathematics is not just separate, here's algebra, here's geometry, here's statistics. We want to be able to integrate those and use them to support one another. So there has to be a coherence by how we do something in kindergarten, how does it get built on in first grade all the way through the grades. That's our coherence. There has to be that vertical growth. And the last, rigor. We are real good in this country with procedural skills. We are real good with that. We've got those kids, and then they get to a class and they don't know, well, why did we do that? There's no real good conceptual understanding. It's just because they told me. And you know, I think I was probably accused of doing this a time or two in my career here, of saying, well, you'll need it for the next class. Oh, that's really relevant to me, isn't it? You know, I could care less about the next class, because in my world, it's today. So we want to make sure that they have, one, the conceptual understanding, which develops the procedural skill, and then they can apply it. So when we're looking at what they do in early grades, we want those problems to be relevant to them and their world. So we're not going to ask them, you know, how many kids go out and buy carpet for their bedroom? You know, that's always a typical type question. Let's talk about things that when you're in the lunch line or you're at McDonald's and you're going to buy something, do you have enough money to do it? Can you figure this out and work on that mental acuity? Those are things that are relevant in their world. The Common Core progressions are a progression. We build upon number and operations. We build upon algebraic thinking, geometry, measurement and data. And so, where in our old standards, everybody had the same categories: number and operations, geometry, measurement, data and probability, pattern selection, algebra. You will see this as a build-up. These are to show the coherence here. This is the way it would be organized when you're looking at it in the document. As an example, in our curriculum framework, we have learning targets. You hear that. We take the standard and put it in kid-friendly language so that the student knows what they're supposed to learn. It isn't just about what I'm supposed to teach. What does the Common Core do differently? It integrates and develops more deeper understanding. The goal for each student is to master each topic, eliminating the need for constant review year after year. I've gone into classrooms and they're teaching things that I said, well, they've been doing that in 4th grade. Why are you doing it in 7th grade? It's like going back to the beginning. And if we're going to be competitive, we have to get away from the mile wide inch deep. In our elementary school, our primary focus is on number, fractions. People used to, it's like, okay, we learned how to do whole number arithmetic, and then we moved to, okay, here's how we do fractions. And we didn't ever really integrate, well, what is it? How are they the same? How are they different in how they operate? Where is a number on a number line? They don't even understand sometimes that there's some sort of sequencing. So there's a lot of work with developing fluency, and you'll notice it says fluency with the standard algorithms. The standard algorithms are not going away. In middle school, we've moved the content to be more statistics, more ratio proportion. That's where percents are. We begin to do the beginnings of linear algebra and geometry. In our high school, we have chosen, and this was with lots and lots of conversation with all of the secondary staff. This wasn't a representative group. It was all the secondary staff. We had the opportunity within the Common Core to choose either to teach in the traditional algebra, geometry, algebra 2 model, or teach in the Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, which takes algebra, geometry, and statistics, and it's built upon each year. And we did that for a couple of reasons. We made this choice before we even sat down with standards. Our science people and our math people in the high school were looking at ways to make connections. We want our children to make connections. We have a STEM program in both of our high schools. We wanted to find ways that we could make better connections with those STEM initiatives as opposed to making contrived connections. We wanted to make them relevant.
Science, technology, engineering, math.
That's right. And regardless of whether a high school chose the integrated pathway or the traditional pathway, it's the same standards for all three courses. They're arranged in a different way. We felt that since students were already coming out of an integrated setting as far as their K-8 experience, that it made sense with our initiatives in our district to go in this direction. And I think I've articulated the ways, the connections. We can make better connections with, because that's what we want. We want an integrated approach, not with, just within the mathematics, to see how algebra, geometry, and statistics relate to each other, but how they relate to other disciplines. What's different is the students need to meet the standards, and in order to do that, what they must learn is not standards. They need to learn mathematics. And
All right, how many pigs and how many chickens? Do you have an answer?
7 pigs, 5 chickens.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm Jamie Lusher. I'm the language arts coordinator for Worthington Schools. I'm here to talk a little bit about our process in terms of our transition to the Common Core. What's exciting to me is that I had the opportunity to work with our English Language Arts Department, K-12, to talk about the instructional shifts and the disciplines of study that we would maintain the integrity of through our process. So you see here the 4 disciplines are reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language. Looks very similar in length to what we've had in years past. Processes haven't changed much. Just to give you some background, here you have the strands, which are the major disciplines of study, but then the topics are the main focus within those strands. And then the standard statements being the incremental steps and skill-based developmentally, K-12, what our students should know at each grade level band. Okay, so you heard a lot about integration and collaboration across disciplines. The major focus of our work and our discussion as we thought about what we wanted our Worthington curriculum to look like was that shared responsibility of literacy, writing, speaking, listening across all contents, transitioning through every grade level, every content area, every classroom, every school in our district. What we're really fortunate to do is to sit down and look at each one of the standards, K to 1, 1 to 2, and look at that articulation piece and determine what we already had in place in terms of the best possible instructional practices and assessments within the district. So our teachers really had an opportunity to build their professional knowledge of what the core was asking them to do, and also look at the expertise and the knowledge that they had within their subject area and content area. They brought with them the same fears that we all have surrounding the Common Core transition. And we worked collaboratively over the past 3 years to have discussions deconstructing these standards and determining what would be best practice for our students and for our instructional leaders. So if I can try to break down all of this information into 10 instructional shifts that we thought were the most powerful as we made this transition. The first was to make close reading an integral part of our daily work within the language arts classroom. Okay? Devouring text, looking at evidence within the text, and structuring opportunities for students to really lavish time on text that would ask them to move up and down Bloom's taxonomy, synthesizing information and being able to compare and contrast the different types of text that we were exposing them to. And we wanted to structure the majority of our instruction so that students would read complex text, not robbing them of rich literature or the complexities of task-to-reader obligations that we ask of our students. We wanted them to have exposure, whether they were reading at their instructional level, whether we were stretching them and reading a complex text aloud so they could hear robust vocabulary terms. We wanted to make sure we had that within the integrity of our documents. We also wanted to emphasize informational text from an early age. As an elementary principal, I can tell you our elementary students devour informational text. They love nonfiction, but somewhere in 4th grade we lose it. And so it's that intention of having balance between informational text, expository text, and great literature. We know we remember things in stories or in pictures. So it's setting that stage so that students are able to use strategies to devour literature, but also nonfiction in a way that's going to allow them to make meaning with their existing knowledge and make connections with the unfamiliar text that they are seeking to inquire about. But we also wanted to make sure that we provided scaffolding, that good instruction is not preempted by just setting the text out there, but we allow students to investigate. We allow them to inquire, to ask questions, to foster creativity, to question everything, but also do that at their independent and instructional levels, that it has to be a balance. They can't be, again, interacting with text that's going to make them frustrated without a teacher's expertise in scaffolding and getting them there to be able to stretch and grow in their emerging, transitioning, and ultimately mastery of literacy skills. Number 5 here, text-dependent questions. We spent a lot of time around this in terms of the task we were going to ask our teachers to set forth within the curriculum formats, but then also ultimately what our students would be doing in terms of the assessments. We were worried that this would be a huge transition for our kids. So we had a lot of conversation around what does this look like? How will a student go back to the text, maybe once, maybe twice, 3 or 4 times, and really build skills, and again, exhibit stamina and being able to go back and find evidence within a deep, meaningful, rich text. Okay? Research, research, research. You'll see a lot of integration opportunities throughout the Common Core requiring students to research not only in language arts, but in science, but in social studies, and a real-life setting. Additionally, we would be looking at regular opportunities for students to share ideas, to speak, to present. Standing in front of an audience is a far different experience than sitting in one. And I can tell you that as we talked with our teachers and we wanted them to share what they were doing, many of them are very comfortable before an audience of students, but you put them before an audience of adults and it's very difficult for them to make that transition. So we had a lot of conversation about what does that look like. K-12, what do those standards look like? What, again, is the threshold for learning at each incremental grade level band, and how are we going to make that come to life through our curriculum documents? All right? Systemic and systematic instruction around vocabulary. As a part of our process, our grade level teams looked at these large anchor standards, broke them down into specific learning targets, and we pulled apart what we felt were the most important words. We know that vocabulary words are not just words, they're triggers to background knowledge. And that's ultimately how our students make the connection between what they know and what we want them to know. So our grade level teams collaborated and pulled out academic vocabulary. Those are vocabulary words that transcend all contents, all grade levels. Words like construct, recognize, distinguish, as a shared responsibility not only for a language arts teacher, but for a social studies teacher, a science teacher, a technology teacher, a music teacher. And really with great intention, made sure we had those earmarked so that our students would be able to, again, focus on the most important gateways to student learning, which are sometimes those vocabulary words for our kids. Finally, explicit instruction in grammar and conventions. That's that language strand. So it's, again, letter to sound connections. Again, the structure of language, that those words live in a sentence, that lives in a paragraph, which lives in a body of text. And having those discussions about what we were already doing that was best practice, and how we can merge that integration piece. And then finally, this piece that we all felt very, very passionate about was cultivating student independence. This conversation that we had with our teachers over the past 2.5 years was really about how do we maintain the integrity of what we put forth in this district? How do we safeguard best practices? How do we continue to build on the best assessment practices that we have in place and make sure that our students, again, have a cohesive, integrated experience where language arts not only lives within the language arts classroom, but transcends in all content areas. Okay? A common misconception we talked about. If you know English language arts teachers, they love To Kill a Mockingbird, and I guarantee you that there's something in their home named Scout. Okay? So we had a lot of conversation about, are we letting go of great literature? No, absolutely not. But we know that our students are reading and writing in every content area in every classroom. And 70% of that in the workplace for them is nonfiction or expository text, and the research shows it's even more. So when we look at the totality of their day, we want to make sure that they have a balance for the types of the text that we're exposing them to. We will still safeguard the great literature that we have in our classes. I just ordered more Shakespeare. We will still maintain the integrity and autonomy of having district decisions about the best possible literature and nonfiction and expository text that we want our students exposed to. We will always maintain student choice. We will always honor parents' perspectives as we decide what text is best aligned with what we're trying to, again, assess and instruct our students at the grade level bands. The great news is that the Common Core allows us to look at not only the qualitative and quantitative features, but now the reader-to-task features of text. For example, The Grapes of Wrath has a lexile of 2nd grade. If you've ever read it, you know it's not appropriate at all for a 2nd grader. And when you look at the reader-to-task conditions, as well as the qualitative conditions, it's about a 10th to 11th grade book for our students. But that's a great example. If you over-focus on the quantitative features of text, you miss the inferencing and some of, again, the rich discussion that our teachers are really, really passionate about. One thing that was exciting too, because as we talked about the misconceptions, we talked about needs in the district. And because we were collaborating around curriculum and looking at best practices, for the first time, Worthington has published grades 6 through 12 summer reads as a want-to, as a discussion between teachers and students and what's out there that's good and what's getting kids reading over the summer. That is the first time that we published something like that on our site, which was a great residual impact of our collaboration. Okay, so I've shared a little bit about the process, but as I said, we met K-12 as grade level teams as a part of our ongoing work. Our folks really worked hard to build their background knowledge and expertise in the Common Core, and they really began to assess what instructional practices and assessment practices that they already had in place that were going to help with those instructional shifts that I outlined as we collaborated to make the transition to the Common Core. Our curriculum formats are Worthington curriculum formats. They are the product of collaboration with Worthington teachers that teach your students, that we go to regularly as experts, and we engage them heavily in this process because we wanted to make sure that this district was safeguarded against any kind of lockstep approach or just taking that Ohio model curriculum or taking the standards and handing those to our teachers. We knew that the rich discussions, the professional collaboration, would ultimately we'd end up with the best result for our students and would be a great opportunity for our staff to begin to collaborate around some of the instructional shifts that we knew we were going to be intentional and think a lot about, especially vocabulary instruction. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, we want our students to demonstrate independence, build strong content knowledge, respond to the varying demands of the audience, task, purpose, and discipline, comprehend as well as critique, value evidence, use technology and digital media strategically and capably, and come to understand other perspectives. Okay, this comes from the Common Core, but as we talked through this with our classroom teachers, like, we do this. This is what we do. You know, when we talk about understanding other perspectives, doesn't mean we agree with everybody. We question everything. We analyze everything. We think about it critically, but ultimately we gather evidence to justify our opinion so that we can make this world a better place. And so our teachers, it was great to see them, again, question what was being asked of them, but then use the opportunity to collaborate to improve processes and continue the great work they've already completed. The final piece of this, as I said, is integration. We acquire knowledge and thinking skills best when we learn them reciprocally. We are asked to read, write, argue, and problem solve as we engage with text and with an organized body of essential knowledge. So, you know, the curriculum is what we teach, but our teachers are experts in pedagogy and how to teach it. And ultimately, that relationship that our teachers build with your students is the most important, powerful relationship that we can foster. So it's that all coming together, which again, will bring the curriculum to life and will ultimately be where we want to go as we make this transition.
Social studies is, I mean, it incorporates the world and everything. And I'm not going to go on and on about social studies because I could. But I was listening to Jamie, Nancy, and Jennifer, and all the words that they told you about rigor, understanding, integration, it all comes to form right here. The understanding of facts and how to formulate a decision is what we do. Oh, come on. There. In this, in these courses, history, geography, economics, government has a model curriculum, and then you see the skills topics within those strands. The skills we learn in English are incorporated right into social studies. The books we read, the classics, whether it's the Odyssey or the Iliad or whatever we are reading, comes right to us in the social studies program. It's a program that gives me goosebumps, as evidenced by today, the 50-year history or the anniversary of Martin Luther King. And I am sure that speech today was in our social studies classes. And I am sure today that a lot of us thought about that because as I look around here, all of us lived through that time period. And we have direct reference to that. Now, The format for the proposed social studies curriculum that isn't proposed any longer, it is passed, is that the format provides guidance and support. I have to tell you that social studies teachers do not come along easily. They have their thoughts, their ideas, their philosophers. They are very trained in the past, the present, and they think a lot about the future. We spent hours discussing this curriculum, and every single one of our teachers not only complied, but has now made a total commitment to this process. And that is something, I don't think that ever happened before in my whole history here in this school system, which has been about 40 years. This is an amazing thing. All right, let's look at the American history curriculum for just a second. The content statement number 5, as Jamie said, these are the big ideas, the big picture, the big content that we have to work from. And from there, we create what is underneath it, the learning targets. As you read content statement 5, make your own reference points around that. Go down to the learning targets, the I can statements. It's no longer what the teacher taught you today. It's now what I learned today. And it's my responsibility as a human being, whether I am 6 years old or 18, to take that responsibility and use their minds very, very well. Okay. I love this stuff. 5 days on that. We have a pacing chart in our curriculum formats. We have a content elaboration. And I'm going to invite you just to read the first paragraph. That first paragraph and its explanation propelled us into the democracy that we are today. The end. It's an amazing thing. Now, the other parts of the curriculum format, the content vocabulary, the academic vocabulary, the assessments that you see, they're both formative, which are informational to us. For the student, really. They inform your student where they are, what they know, what they still need to know. And then the summative assessments are how we base our grades and the state, but we're getting them ready for these state tests. We don't want to leave them hanging. So we're scaffolding them with information along the entire way, right? So the end result is then we can find out if we need intervention strategies, whether we need enrichment for them. Some of the students I've taught over the years are absolutely off the chart. They're brilliant. And some of them need support, need help. And we know that our DNA is not all the same. And so why wouldn't we help everybody? Okay, major changes. In grades 4 and 5, the content changes were the most. American history as well as Ohio history are now taught in grade 4. Grade 5 used to teach American history. In grades 6 through 12, we have what is called the ELA Common Core Standards for Reading and Writing. Well, why wouldn't we have reading and writing in social studies? It makes it makes total sense. Why would we not want thoughts on paper, persuasion on paper, clear thinking on paper? It's really important to practice this. And as I look at the ELA Common Standards, you're going to love this. The Federalist Papers are all over it. If you are an American Revolutionary buff, you would love this. All right, 9 through 12, we have what we call course syllabi. So in Worthington, our 3 required courses are up there. But we also have other courses in the social studies department as well. '21st century skills. Historical thinking, spatial thinking, civic participation. Now I'm going to hit that one because this one is critical to all of us all the time. The spatial thinking is about geography, how we geographically place ourselves and think. The civic participation might beg the question, what choices have we made as human beings? Why did we make them? What was the end result? Not only for our town, our state, our country, but the world. These are critical, critical questions. Okay, these will be on the website because I know you want to ask questions. But what you see up here, there's not one that I would remove. There's some definitions for you when you go to the website so that you can understand, and examples for you what all this is and what it's all about. The end.
At this time, I'd like to invite all of our presenters to come up and join me on this panel that became a panel of one. Absolutely.
Well, we're out of seats, so I guess I'm off the hook.
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
So I provided them with a few questions that I had. Really taking a look at a lot of the opposition to Common Core and putting together a series of questions that more directly are related to curriculum, because a lot of the opposition is better addressed at the state level, and things that at the district level they don't have as much role in. So to start off, I wanted to speak about a particular book. This last week, this became a very hot topic, so to speak, and I think it was touched on briefly, but I wanted to go through it a little bit in more detail. I've not read this book, so the themes of it there may be a great message behind the work, but there were some components of the book that were very concerning. It was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And in this book, there was some very graphic depictions of, sexually in nature, including things like pedophilia, incest, and not just that they had references, sexual references, but the fact that the content was so graphic that I would choose not to read it in front of a group like this. This is on the recommended reading for 11th grade that the Ohio Department of Education has linked to the Common Core website. So I was concerned. I just wanted to find out what our district is doing to kind of just to safeguard our kids from coming across material that this may be a great work for adults, but I think many of us would have a concern about our 11th graders reading a work like this. So.
Okay. Well, what's great about Worthington is they've had a process in place for many years that will not change. We will look at, again, as books come out, our process will be the same, where our teachers will continue to collaborate, to have discussion about some of the things that you just outlined. In terms of anything that's been published by the Common Core or the Ohio Department of Education, those are intended to be documents as resources or examples. we certainly reference those. We look at them, we look at the excerpts. Many of the excerpts or the exemplars are, as Nancy outlined, you know, the Federalist Papers, the Gettysburg Address. I mean, some excerpts from really good stuff, and there are other things that, you know, can be controversial, that may have what we feel would be not appropriate material for students. And as with any process, we continue to maintain the integrity of collaboration, student choice, and then ultimately partnering with parents as you work through, you know, any situation where a parent may have an objection to a book in the library. And that happens from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade, not just with the Bluest Eye, but with Harry Potter and, you know, other types of works. And that's just been kind of an ongoing discussion as literature's been on our shelves. So our process is the same. We'll continue to maintain the integrity of the process, but also recognize that those resources that are coming out are not have-tos, but required reads that we have to adopt holistically. They're references or resources, or what we call exemplars or examples. So when my 4th grade curriculum writing team is like, well, what's a grade level appropriate 4th grade text, and I'm tired of teaching the Bridge to Terabithia, they can look at that, and the boys are tired of reading it, they can look at those exemplars and get some frame of reference of what is being endorsed as Common Core. Now, just like with our curriculum format process, our teachers are knowledgeable, they're experts, they're wise, they seek feedback from parents, and they'll continue to maintain the integrity of that process. So the Common Core won't undermine any of the internal autonomy or discussions that we have around those types of things.
And just to build on that, our librarians do not buy a book ever without fully reading reviews from multiple sources, not just in terms of the content of the literature, but the appropriateness of it. So they do a lot of research before they buy anything, and they match it to not just the content and the expectations, but also the local ones.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'm not looking, I don't think I'm looking to blacklist anything, but as far as a recommended, where, teachers would actually recommend a material like this, or, required reading, I think is what the biggest concern would be.
And then also the additional safeguard is if it's a required read, then that's what we call a board adopted. And the board adoption process is not only do the teachers review it, research it, and recommend it, but then we recommend it to the board. Then we have the opportunity for community to provide reflection and input then before the board adopts it too. So if it's a required read, then it's also board adopted.
Okay.
So then that book's not on any list if you so determine that it's
particular
not
book?
acceptable. Yeah,
That
I
particular
mean that
book is
one
not-
or anything like that.
Is it in our school libraries?
I don't want to say yes or no without checking. I don't think so, but I will double check. Toni Morrison is an extremely well-respected author. We have a lot of her books in the library. I can tell you for sure it's not in the elementary library.
But certainly in the Worthington Public Library.
Can I ask how many of you have read that book? Completely?
I read excerpts of it. I didn't read it.
Quite a long
cover to
time
cover.
ago. It's not a new book.
No,
No.
not
Yeah, I'm familiar with the author, and I've read excerpts of the book, but have not read it completely. But I think the key here, what we're saying, is that it's on the recommended list, and there is a completely vetting process, not only for the Bluest Eye, but for any books, especially as Jamie just mentioned, because you're going to find people and groups who have objections to just about any book that's out there. But the key is, have we gone through a complete vetting process to have input from our teaching staff, community members, and of course from our board. So we're not just going to say, here's a book, the Common Core group says it's on the recommended list, and it becomes part of our collection.
But it has been vetted by the state of Ohio.
No.
No.
I think it's important to understand the distinction between, I'll let Jamie talk more about it because it's her area, between an exemplar list and a recommended list. It's not on a recommended list, it's on a list of exemplar. So it's examples of books that might allow the teacher to be able to teach the particular standards, but it's not a recommended list. So it's not recommended for us to buy it, it's just an example for a teacher to look at that's looking for complex text of that level. So.
Right, and you give recommendations for a variety of things, from text to the way to teach, to content elaborations, to an entire model curriculum. We certainly read those, we look at those, we take those into consideration, but at the end of the day, we maintain our process and the autonomy to make the best decisions for our students. But I can't impress enough that always there's that element of school of student choice, and our schools having the opportunity to collaborate with students to get their feedback. Because quite honestly, a student may pick that up off of a shelf at the Worthing Public Library and be offended and not want to read it. We want to hear their voice and their feedback. So I mean, the process is the same. I think though our teachers even had some of these questions too, because when you go to the Common Core website and you pull up like Appendix B, it has the examples or the exemplars, and they're like, well, are we going to be adopting these? Do we need to run out and buy these? And no, they're just examples to give you an idea when you look, as I talked about, the quantitative, qualitative, and reader-to-task features of text, that when you go through that rubric, this would be the grade level band that we're talking about. So it'd be an example of a 4th grade text, or in this case, an 11th or 12th grade band text.
Why would you want a book like that in the library to hasten the morals of our students to go down, and in our country the morals are already going down? Why would we want to hasten that process? That book will enhance the destroying of the morals of this country.
Let me speak up on this too, because the objection that I presented was just that of recommended and required reading. I can't speak for everyone, but I'm not in favor of blacklisting materials. It's things like this can be as someone, a constitutionalist, I want people to know, to read about communism. I want people to be able to see what the opposite is. So I don't know the discussion around ending the material. It's just the age appropriateness of the material and making sure that it's not recommended or required reading by our teachers. So.
Well, Lenin said in 1913, how to destroy America was destroy the morals and the students, control the students.
I think that's a kind of a different discussion along those lines. Not necessarily what the district is, what I would think the district is responsible for. I think that more would be in line with our parents and what they're allowing their kids to read.
Right. I just want to understand the difference between a list, like an exemplary list. Is that something that's available for the students as well as a recommended list? I mean, do they?
No, they were produced to help support the transition as we looked at alignment of primary documents and the integration of some of the content-specific texts like science and social studies to give an idea of where you could collaborate. So there are exemplars or examples of what that grade level text would look like in technical subjects or in math or in science and social studies. So our teachers looked at those. I mean, I suppose a student could look at them, but it wouldn't be like they would pull that off as a summer reading list. As I said, we created those based on discussion around, we can come up with way better examples of texts that we use currently in our classes that would be great reads for our kids over the summer, not as a have to, but as a way to keep them reading through those summer months.
So is on an example list that
Yeah.
that the students have?
No, we don't, not those, but we created summer reads.
Okay.
That have
Next
separate,
one.
separate of that, with the Tin Library.
So another topic that's been a topic of discussion related to Common Core is data collection. I wanted to find out, I don't know if you're Dr. Tucker, if you're the one to best handle this one, but what type of data is being collected from our students, whether it's from assignments or assessments, and where is that data being going? Where is it going?
The Common Core has not, to my knowledge, specified any additional collection of data other than what's being collected right now. As a matter of fact, our auditor for the state of Ohio is really pushing that we are able to match at the state level, match student ID numbers. When students take assessments, the testing company, and Abe is shaking his head because he assesses tests, he never tells us what's on the test, he assesses. It's not tied back into the student. A student has a discrete student identification number. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the state has had trouble really verifying student data, because the school district, at the school district level, we have the student's name. We never send it off to the vendor. The vendor receives the student identification number. And even at the Ohio Department of Education, those departments receive the student identification number. So we're not going to start providing student social security numbers. We're not going to start providing students' names right now, unless the state law changes.
Right. Right.
And that's a state law. That's an issue we need to.
Right.
Mike is, our good friend Mike is there somewhere, so Mike can certainly speak on that, and I want to thank Mike for certainly coming out tonight, but that's a state law issue. Right now, state law does not permit us to provide the students' names to the testing company, to the student identifier number.
In anticipation of tonight's meeting, and because things change rapidly in the world of education and legislation, I made a phone call yesterday to the person who will be overseeing and working with the new state assessments, and I asked just that question. Is any additional data going to be collected? Is there any changes in the data collection or the use of it? And she said to me, and she's a Worthington resident, I might add, she said that no data different than what is currently collected, through the state assessment will be collected with the new state assessment. So there will be no changes there. Now, you might argue whether or not you want that, but we don't turn in state. Everything's linked to a SSID or a state student ID number.
No, you said that you're for accountability, and I wonder, how can you reach accountability if you can't get results? And how you can't get comparable results unless you can track individuals? And I think that what Dr. Tucker said is true. There's a number. Number refers to the district, number refers to the school, number refers to the student with no name. And I know because I do some test grading, and I do some of the translation for the one thing, and I can tell when the same kid comes through that what the kid is doing in the different disciplines, because I see the number, but I don't know who the kid is.
And I think that's the basis of the question, is to find out what data is being sent.
Yeah, but see,
to the state, federal level.
some people object to it, and yet the question is, how do you get the results you want through accountability if you have no way of tracking?
I
So
don't think that,
you can't have it both ways.
or I don't think that was the basis of the question either. Obviously, there is some level of information that's needed to understand how schools are performing, for instance. So,
Jeremy, I'd like to read something that, the Education Action Group, I'm sure you all read their stuff, and they said something out today which is directly on point. I'd like to read it and then get a comment from Dr. Tucker, if you don't mind. So it goes like this. It has to do with the FERPA changes that we've discussed at Tea Party meetings. So the FERPA changes will allow states and school districts to share student-specific information with educational technology companies that can use the data, stored in longitudinal data systems, which all 50 states now have, thanks to the federal government, to personalize the learning process. Stephanie Simon of Reuters News Service describes how it works. Just one more paragraph. Does Johnny have trouble converting decimals to fractions? The database will have recorded that, and may have recorded as well that he finds textbooks boring, adores animation, and plays baseball after school. Personalized learning software can use that data to serve up a tailor-made math lesson, perhaps an animated game that uses baseball statistics to teach decimals. Is anything like that happening?
Absolutely not, and the opportunity is made. And again, I'm glad we have our good friend Mike Duffy here, and we have our board members here as well, because it will take a change in state law in order for that to happen. Again, when Mark read his piece there, it was may or could. Those words in future tense. So again, we're concerned about that. We're concerned about students and teachers' privacy rights. Make no mistake about that. So do we as a society, do we as a city allow that to happen? I surely don't want that to happen.
And I'm not a politician, and I'm not a superintendent, but from a curricular point of view, there would not be a curriculum person in the world who would want vendors to be making decisions about what resources and curriculum our kids. That's what we're trained to do. That's what you put faith in us to do. That's what we have spent our entire lives trying to do a good job of. we would have a lot of concerns about legislation being passed in Ohio that allowed vendors to have access to determining resources that would go in our hands. That would go against everything that we believe as educators, so.
So are you saying that state law will trump federal mandates or federal law?
That's a very complex question.
But it could happen.
Well,
Get some kind of mandates handed down to you.
we'll leave that to the attorneys, but you're making a very good fundamental point. There are federal laws and state laws that prevent that from happening right now. Right now, for example, the federal government has provided additional money for students to take the ACT. I'm sure some of you heard, particularly those students who come from impoverished backgrounds. I, as superintendent, cannot go to my food service director and say, hey, can you give me a list of kids who are on free and reduced lunch? I don't have access to that, to provide those students with vouchers, if you will, to take ACT tests free of charge at a reduced price. So again, that's something that our lawmakers and our lawyers will eventually fight it out on, if you will.
And on that topic, as I mentioned, I believe we're going to be able to have Andrew Brenner speak about his two bills, one of which deals directly with data, data collection and not allowing any of that type of data being sent to the federal government. So we'll allow him to speak more to that. So.
Who is the biggest sponsor of this Common Core? What two individuals or a group of individuals is the biggest sponsor of Common Core?
Big company.
That's kind of a big question.
Huh?
I think that's a big question.
Well, how about Bill Gates?
I understand. Yeah, but I don't think that question is relevant to the.
Well, we got to find out who is sponsoring it and his views on things. Or if I was sponsoring it, you'd want to know my views on things, wouldn't you?
Right. So the Common Core standards are adopted by the state. The district, and anybody weigh in and correct me if I'm wrong, they form the curriculum based on what the state has signed on to. So a question like that and that type of discussion will be very relevant for Mike Duffy, for Andrew Brenner, folks that are at the state level, and to find whether we're talking about repealing the standards or moving to something different. It's a good question. But it's very much, I don't think it's relevant to this particular audience.
Well, why don't you think it's relevant that the teachers know? Why do you think it's not relevant?
Because they can't do anything about it. They can't make that change. That would be our representatives that we need to speak to about that.
Yeah, they can't make changes in the curriculum.
And if the state says don't follow that curriculum, then they cut the money off. The federal government cuts the money off.
And can the state of Ohio get out of this?
Again, the representatives from our district can't, I don't think.
Well, we can answer some of these questions.
Yes, we
I
can.
mean, the first question you asked was, can we make changes to the curriculum? You want to address that?
Yeah, we have a lot of local control. I mean, we've always written local standards from state curriculum, and state curriculum was always derived from studying national curriculum. This process is no different, but Ohio is a local control state, so ultimately every single school district has the right to write its own curriculum. Now, the hang-up is we're assessed as a district on these standards. So if our state assessments are designed around the standards, then it's illogical to write a completely different standard. And as you know, there's lots of attention around state report cards and accountability. And again, accountability goes back to No Child Left Behind. That has nothing to do with Common Core.
Nancy sort of put this in a frame of reference. She put a very powerful slide up. And I don't know if we paid very close attention to it. She talked about curriculum. Think about this. The Common Core state standards are standards that 45 states have adopted, and there's been at least one, probably 2 states who have said, we don't want to adopt them. I personally believe that they're making a mistake, and we can talk some other time about that. But think about this for me, just follow me for a second. The standards are what students should know and be able to do in English language arts and mathematics, K through 12, and that's it. We must not confuse standards with curriculum. Worthington has one of the best curriculums around. I want to go back to Nancy's example. She listed the curriculum framework. The curriculum consists of, yes, the standards. We had the Ohio Academic Content Standards, so what students should know and be able to do at a particular grade. The resources, the textbooks, the online resources. She talked about the pacing guide. Okay, this is what this kid should know. This is when they should know it, so that there's no duplicity from grade level to grade level. The vocabulary that students should be able to know. The formative assessments, for which we've gotten very good at here. The summative assessments. And so you take all this becomes your written curriculum. And then your teachers teach the curriculum. They can teach it any way they want. And you know, some of us are great teachers, and some of us are okay teachers. I think I was probably one of those okay teachers. But we have talented teachers here, and they use their creativity every day in teaching the Worthington curriculum. And then you have the assessed curriculum that Jennifer just talked about. And we know the big bad assessed curriculum would be the OGT and the OAAs and our exams in the classroom. So don't think of curriculum as just one single entity, the standards. It's way beyond that. And we have such a richness of curriculum. Certainly one of the things that drew me here, because we had the resources, the people resources, the skill sets, and we had outstanding students and parents here that ensured when our kids left Worthington, a Worthington education provided them an opportunity to be successful in careers and in higher education. And I think the Common Core has the potential to provide our kids even more opportunities to be successful.
So what if you had, I guess the right word is dyslexia, that's a person that can't learn English very good. If you had a student like that, you're going to command him to learn the same thing that the other ones did? Because it's a standard that the school district set, or Common Core set?
And I'll let our, he's asking, we know that kids come at different levels.
Right.
And there are some kids ahead and some kids are behind. And
well, you know, there's a couple ways of looking at that in regard to the Common Core. First of all, one of the things that we hope a common set of standards does for us, not just in Worthington, but across Ohio, is that students don't come to us with such big gaps. You know, if students start in Worthington and they end in Worthington, it's a much easier scenario for us. However, that's not the way it works. I mean, people are mobile now. So what the Common Core says, yes, you are to provide supports for those students so that they can learn. But when you look at the standard in terms of what your expectation is, they can learn it. Nancy used the pigs and the chickens example. That problem could be part of an algebra lesson as well as a second grader's lesson. So when we look at what the big idea is or what the essential learning is, it really can be broken down to that student's level of where they are right then. Now, if a student doesn't speak English, job number one obviously is to help enable them to gain some English skills so that they can access the instruction. So we have to work with them and help them learn and grow. But it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. I commend both of our high schools because they've had students who have entered who are of 11th grade age, but this has been their first formal education. And we have actually had those students graduate, passing the OGT, with some support. Now that support might be a translation or it might be an extended time to take the test. So the general answer is yes. There are exceptions to that, and those exceptions might come in the form of a student who's on an individualized education plan. And that might outline for us some different goals and objectives, but the parent's part of writing that, the teachers are part of writing that. So generally speaking, yes, if there are exceptions to that, then we have an exceptional way of dealing with that. But our vision is always to move them, be able to move them forward and be able to access the regular curriculum.
I have all the faith in the Worthington schools. I think they're great school system. I think, maybe I'm speaking for others here though, I think it's like the devil is in the details. I mean, the program sounds wonderful, beautiful, you present it well, but it's the details of, you know, reading lists or, you know, many of us have come to kind of mistrust the government who has a bias and an agenda maybe, and is this, you know, being kind of worked in through all this. And I think that's maybe where I have some concerns. Not that you're not doing what's best for our kids,
The
but...
only thing I can say about that is we all have education degrees and lots of experience, and we're pretty savvy, but the government isn't writing our book lists and they aren't determining our resources.
But the test, I mean, but you're
well,
working toward
the tests don't test resources. So other than the things that are outlined in the curriculum, which might be the Federalist Papers or some things like that, there are very few things. Jamie's gone; she could speak more to this. But they would be items that you would expect to see in curriculum. So there are very few resources that are defined and named in the Common Core. And those resources that are there are things like the Federalist Papers.
like nonfiction reading. I mean, what's included in nonfiction reading? I mean, maybe the Federalist Papers, but what other types of things are nonfiction?
Well, yeah. We would have to go back and pull our Worthington list to look at that. And again, those come out with the syllabi at the beginning of the year, and parents
But Park isn't
see
going
that.
to assess on those.
No, Park is not going to assess on those. Park will assess on the standards, and we use the resources to teach those standards. And we have things that we prefer to use, and they have some things we're recommending, but we will make those decisions.
Is that list something that you can provide that I can forward out to folks?
I mean, I don't personally have
I heard
it
you
because
mentioned we would have brought it if we didn't know.
Well, the summer reading list.
the summer reading list is posted on our website.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
right on the website.
Yeah, the summer reading list, and again, those are books that we recommend, but it's up to parents
Right.
on whether or not they choose.
That's
them.
my recommendation is, as you're seeing kids come home with different materials, pay attention to what they're reading, and if there are objections, you make those known.
Yeah.
At least that's what we're doing with our kids.
I'd like to ask a question, and this would be for the superintendent. Can you give some rough approximation of what percentage of the federal core curriculum the Worthington School District utilizes?
We don't have a federal core curriculum, first of all. So you're talking about the common core, the English language arts? Okay.
No, how much of it that we're using that's already in place, is that your question?
Yes, how much is in lockstep with what's being handed down by the federal government?
There isn't any
No.
curriculum handed down by the federal government. We don't have any curriculum handed down by the federal government. We have used the Common Core curriculum that was developed by those groups, the American Diploma Project, and then the Governor's Commission put in place alignment projects, but we don't have a federal curriculum.
Well, you mentioned that there's 45 states, then,
Right.
is all 45 states going to be in line with the same thing that the state of Ohio teaches? So if they are, then the federal government has handed those.
I understand where you're coming from. Again, I want us to separate the standards from curriculum. They're
Right.
two different things. Now,
How much of
45
the Common Core standards are in the Worthington curriculum?
Correct.
It's all fully aligned. It's fully aligned with the Common Core standards. The Worthington curriculum is, but we've gone deeper,
Correct.
broader. In some places, we've left some things out. So it's not that we took that and adopted it, and then okay, we'll buy another textbook with it. So.
In the second part of this, and I think where some of the rub is across the country, is that we think it's lock and step. It's not a lock and step curriculum. It's just simply saying that in this particular subject, again, whether it's language arts or math, this is what our students should know at this particular grade. It does not prescribe exactly to the day, to the minute of what you should teach on a particular day.
Or how you teach
Or
it.
how, and more importantly,
More
how you should
importantly,
teach it.
yeah.
Instructional
Yeah.
strategies.
So I think that's a good segue talking about instructional strategy, because one of the things I've seen, Yahoo News reported a 30 to 40% drop in test scores across the board in New York and Kentucky. Those states among the first and are now beyond their first year of implementing Common Core. A common phrase that was used in the curriculum at my kids' school, they attend Bluffview, we've got a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. With the new Stepping Stones math program, a common statement that was made by both teachers was, this is a new program that we'll be learning along with your kids. So my question is, are our teachers prepared for these changes, or should we expect some of these similar test score drops across the board in our first year of implementing it here in Worthington? So I don't know who wants to tackle that.
One of the biggest question that we got from the board when we presented is, what's the professional development that's going to occur with these changes? And my calendar is pretty packed with those opportunities and have been as we move through. They're learning too, only because the standards have changed for what they were to teach last year in some grades, because of the assessments have changed, and now they're not quite the same. Now in my area, remember, there's a progression. Anyway, you're going to have to learn certain skills before you learn certain other skills. So that part hasn't changed. But what has is, how are you asking these questions so that the students understand and really understand what those standards mean? And I think sometimes some of our teachers they're going, yeah, I never thought about it that way. And it's helping it's building the teacher toolbox. But please know that the teachers are going to have opportunities to continue to learn. Sometimes they have to get into it before. I just sat with 1st grade teachers before I came to this meeting, and they were looking at that program and how that aligns with what they were going to do. Even though the teachers teach in different ways, they were saying, they teach the standards, they're getting that main idea across to the students, but they may have a little different methodology for how they do that. The stepping stones piece is built on the standards, and that progression that I showed you, it moves in that direction, so it's building that foundation so that they don't create those gaps. And so they are asking questions that are different than what they previously asked, to get that deeper understanding and make sure that the students fully get what it is that they're supposed to learn. Thus the learning targets, thus the varying ways. We're changing what a math classroom looks like. That's bigger, I think. One, we're using more digital type resources and using the technology in a different way. We're asking kids to collaborate more and talk through and problem solve together. And they were just telling me today, they move in groups and they have these different opportunities. They're tying it to literature. They're tying it to other subjects. That's been different. It's been fragmented before. That's the bigger change. It's not the program. Stepping Stones is a resource that we use. That's not the only resource that they have available to them. But yes, they're going to be learning, and we plan for that learning.
That's an excellent question, though, because as we often say, we're rebuilding the plane while we're flying it, and that's a precarious place to be. And so our teachers are teaching as they're learning. There is always professional development provided for them before they start using a new resource or start using a new curriculum. But the reality of it is, until you live it and breathe it, you don't know where the weaknesses might be or what maybe didn't work together. So in regard to that, how we're approaching it in Worthington, I can't speak to any other district. We have created a kind of a professional development group within each building. So, for example, in English language arts in an elementary, we'll have a primary teacher, an intermediate teacher, And our curriculum leaders will meet with them quarterly to do professional development, as well as hear, how is that going? How is that new resource? Is that curriculum working? What's going on? So again, we can make those adjustments along the way. Now, those will be minor kinds of things that I don't think students will notice, but really our teachers have a tremendous amount of pressure on them right now to perform well with new curriculum that they're learning and new standards along the way. So I appreciate the sensitivity of that question, and there's really no way for us to sit here and go, oh yes, they're absolutely prepared. There are opportunities for them to prepare, and then the biggest thing for me is that they're able to provide feedback to us, and it isn't lockstep, it isn't set in stone. We will make those adjustments as we need to make along the way.
Our teachers are communicating with each other today. I must have had lists on the blogs that I had trouble with this. How are you adjusting to that? My kids struggled with this question. They've never had that opportunity to collaborate across the district because now the technology allows for that.
And quite honestly, that's our favorite byproduct of all this, is that teachers are no longer sole contractors. You know, they go in their room and they close the door and they do their own thing without support of one another. They meet frequently as teams, not just in their building, but across the district, and they're sharing what works with each other. I mean, can you imagine that? You know, as each teacher shares with the other teacher what worked in best practices, you know, how much better we're going to become in a profession. Before, they were afraid to do that. I'm not really sure why, but they were afraid to do that. They kept their favorite units to themselves and that sort of thing. But my favorite byproduct of this whole thing is that teachers work, and I'll look to Mary Rakowski back there, who's one of our building principals, and could speak to this too, but they are really reaching out to one another, and I think they will be all that much stronger because of it. I mean, we're much better, you know, when we work as a team than we are when we work as individuals.
They are not seeing themselves as, this is Bluffs View, this is Brookside. They're seeing as, I'm the elementary teacher in the Worthington schools. Our middle school teachers, I mean, they don't see they're communicating in such a way that they're part of the bigger organization. Yes, they're prideful about their school and all of that, but they don't see themselves as in a competitive way. It's really a collaborative. And that's, as I said, I have to second that with what Jennifer had said. That to me has been the biggest satisfaction.
How you all can facilitate your professional development, everything like you were talking about. I feel for the teachers big time. I've had 3 that have given their confidence to me and told me that they have huge red flags over Common Core. And I've, asked them why. We've had great discussions, and I said, who have you told about this? Well, nobody. Well, why haven't you told anybody? They won't speak out. And I said, you've got to. And they said, I can't. And I begged them. I said, please, can I use your information? Can I get, nope. I have to protect their confidence. But I was hoping that the Worthington could somehow come up with a way that these poor teachers don't have to be scared to death to speak out when they're seeing huge red flags.
And we need to work on that to ensure that we have a more robust professional development opportunity for our teachers, but also help all of us to understand the unknown. We know across this country when there's a new curriculum adoption, scores will generally drop, especially a new assessment adoption of an assessment system. And that's what Kentucky and Tennessee and New York, the early adopters of the assessments based on the Common Core. But we also know, we experienced this in Ohio. Do you all remember the days of the 9th grade proficiency test? We were afraid, and I was afraid, as a building assistant principal, how we're going to get these kids, how we're going to get our teachers prepared. But we did engage in a lot of professional development. We operated and we held hands as a unit. And so guess what? We mastered the 9th grade proficiency test. A few years later, they said, well, that's too easy. That's based on what the kids should know at the end of 8th grade. Let's come up with the OGT. Well, now we're knocking the OGT out of the park. So now our our lawmakers, and not to pick on our lawmakers, they're here, and our State Board of Education, excuse me, our State Board of Education, and the folks at the Ohio Department of Education said, well, let's come up with an even tougher system. Let's see how they do. But at the end of the day, folks, we work together and we arrive, and we get there. Just give us some time and we'll get there.
Jeremy, to directly answer your question about New York, it's no mystery what happened in New York. They raised what constitutes passing. I mean, the number was X, and then the next year the number was X plus 20. So they just increased the required score to pass, and then. And if they do the same thing in Ohio, and the rumor is that they are going to increase what they call the cut score.
Well, and let's be very clear, and I can't speak to the private conversation you had with somebody, and I don't want to. I can assure you, we had lots of open and animated conversation around all this with teachers. So, but that doesn't mean there aren't individuals. But what I will say, teachers are afraid of, and they have very good right to be, are the assessments because of that. Because in Ohio, teachers' evaluations are tied to test results. That's required by law. And when we ask them to embrace new curriculum that's rigorous, and then they read in the paper, oh, you know, Ohio's test scores are going to drop, and 50% of your evaluation is tied to those test scores, of course they're afraid. Their livelihood depends on that. So what we have tried very hard to do is there's some things we have control over and try to keep those fears separated. But when it comes to day-to-day living in that classroom, and you know your principal is sitting down with you the first time with this new evaluation system, and you realize those test scores, yeah, I'm okay this year because it's the old system. I might be okay next year, but the year after that, I don't know. And you know, when we don't know, when we get on a plane, how many times do you get on a plane you don't know where it's flying to? And whether or not everything was checked out the way it should. So I don't want to sit here and you know, be insincere about that. Of course they're afraid about that, and I would be too. If my livelihood was dependent on that. But what happens is sometimes they get that mixed up with the curriculum.
The assessment is probably one of the biggest problems with this whole thing. Some of the stuff that Jennifer just said, but having seen what it is, I can write a question that any student pass on a subject, and I can write the same question on the same subject that no one passed. One of the problems that I've seen is that much of the assessment is tied to the literacy level of the students. Yes. And the problem is that you can't answer a math problem if you can't read it, what it says. And so the whole thing has to come together, and this is what we see now. It is not going to happen right away, but of course the legislature in its infinite wisdom, sorry Mac, has decided that they are going to put the teachers through this type of a thing. And you know, it takes you have to have lived it, you have to have seen it. And so one of the questions, for instance, one math, I have seen a question go through that I had to correct, that I had to grade in a certain way, even though I knew that the teachers knew, and the one in science also, that the student was right. But no, the prescription said it had to be this way, and otherwise it was incorrect. And this is the kind of problem that we're going to face. But if you want accountability, you're going to have, and right now, the writing of question is in the hands of private companies. Now they are tested, that you go through field tests, I've done all this and all that. But that is where the biggest problem is going to be. And that is why putting the livelihood of teachers on the line with something that they really have no control is not fair.
It's scary.
Doctor,
Yes.
I just want you to know that I hate to be in your shoes. Because there's many of us in this room that we've heard what these four ladies told us. Once we get into it, you're going to find out how much we like it. You know how many times we've heard that in the last 2 or 3 years about Obamacare? Now we're being told again that this educational program that they've thrown on top of us without any data, without ever letting us know that it's coming, no parent knows how to help their child. And we're supposed to embrace this? I don't understand I don't understand your thinking. I'm sorry. And I hope your wife and family loves you, because you're going to need a lot of strong shoulders.
I just have a real specific question about the test, but before that, I just want to make a comment that when I have shown concern, especially about my youngest daughter's falling in the middle of the transition to this in math, my older kids have turned to me and they have said, Mom, teacher, and I'm not going to put in names, is not going to let that happen. Because we do. We have some really great teachers, and that's the only piece of, I mean, I love what you presented tonight, but that's the peace of mind that I come to when I get upset about some things that I see, because I know some of these teachers and they are really good.
Can I add to that? I have been in this district longer than most people. I started my student teaching. I taught in the district. I was a substitute teacher, and now I've been a curriculum leader. And I would have to echo what you're saying. Our teachers will not allow that to happen because they love their kids and they love this district and they want the best for them. I want the best for them. I would not allow them to, there wouldn't be any, we had a lot of good discussion around what we did. They had a lot of input in that. And I truly believe they want the best for your children, and we are looking at all the ways that we can, because we're not in disagreement with the standards and the progression of what we have to teach. It makes a lot of sense. Our teachers were not against any of that. It is, how do we do this in an appropriate way and meet all the needs of our kids? And that's always been our mission.
That's the fear in the word.
The testing, last year when my children scheduled for this year's classes, I had the understanding that this school year that we're currently in, they would have end of course test by the PART consortium that would count towards their grade on their grade card. Is that happening this year in Worthington?
Not at all.
Okay. And then you mentioned that the college and career readiness, Worthington will be using the PSAT for that?
Not this year, not the 13-14 school year.
Do they have to, so they don't have to even do that this year?
No, the following year. The following year. 10th graders will.
Next year's 10th graders?
Next year's 10th
Okay.
graders.
And
And no cut score has been established. Generally, it takes about 2 years before the state establishes a cut score. And we don't know whether there will be any sanctions if you don't meet the cut score yet. That has not been vetted.
Okay, so the state chose the PSAT to use for that, or our district did?
No, the state. This
Oh,
is every sophomore in the state of Ohio will take the PSAT, if you will, free of charge.
Okay.
As you know now,
Okay,
there's a
that was
cost.
going to be my
It's
next
free of
question.
charge.
So the state's going to pay for that? We as
Correct. No, the
parents of the
state-
district don't have
that's
to
correct.
pay that fee like
The
we
state-
currently do now? for
Correct.
PSAT?
The state will pay.
Well, directors, yeah.
Yes, the state.
We're kind of running a little bit over. I did want to get a couple of questions in from a financial perspective. There's been reports that with the assessment, that the costs of the assessments in some cases are looking to be increased from $6 to $9 per student to as much as, I was told, $40 to $45 per student. Do we have an idea what our current cost of assessment is today and future projections?
Now, remember the OGTs and the OAAs, those costs are paid for at the state level. The districts, the local taxpayers don't pay for those assessments. Just as with the PSAT, we won't pay for those as well.
So you don't know the...
No, I don't know what the state is paying. However, the state has said one of the benefits of going with the PARC assessment is that you can enjoy a greater economy of scale because those states that have adopted the PARC assessments, the Common Core and PARC assessments, will administer the same assessments.
That'll be a question we'll save for Andy.
Now, again, I don't know the answer, but I'm just simply saying that's what they're saying.
Sure. And the final question, it's a little switching gears a little bit. This is more away from Common Core, but I received this newsletter from our school, Busview. One of the things it mentioned is, I'll just read this to you. A second change that you will notice in addition, or I'm sorry, let me go back up. Okay, as a result of the recent bond issue passage, we are receiving 5 additional smart boards. So they now have smart boards in all of the classrooms. You know,
That's at Bluffsview, you're saying.
right, so, and let me just, you know, full disclosure, I'm in technology, I understand the benefits of technology. Before reading this, Bluffsview had taken on, really the PTA had taken on fundraising, and we've been doing this for multiple years to you know, put these smart boards in at the, you know, with these fundraiser activities, not with tax dollars. I also, we saw, I don't have it in writing, but we also heard that Summit Park also purchased some of these smart boards, as well as some iPads as a result of the bond issue. I just wanted to find out, do we have an idea of how much was spent on these types of technologies? And let me just say, I'm again, I'm not against utilizing them. Just we're in the time that, you know, our economy has not been in a great position over the last, you know, number of years, with, you know, cost of the grocery store increasing as much as 20%, cost of gas, unemployment. So the additional taxes that was as a result of the most recent levy, I want to find, is this really been the best use of some of those funds?
Yeah, I certainly believe it is, especially when we start to look at the equity issue. Bluffsview is a community that has a PTA, PTO that's certainly capable of raising quite a bit of funds too, and we're very, very thankful for our PTOs, PTAs, and contributions that our folks have made, and obviously supporting our operating levy bond issue. But Bluffsview is an example of a school community that's been able to purchase those things for our students and our teachers, whereas in some of our other buildings, they were not able to raise those types of funds. Or another part that we often forget, some buildings, through the PTA, PTO, and staff and administration have decided that maybe they don't want smart boards, they want iPads or some other technology.
The other thing is probably important to know too, in terms of the direction that resources are moving away from the traditional texts in a lot of cases to digital resources. And while we can use those digital resources without smart boards, they're much more effective on a smart board because students can get up there and demonstrate and move things around. So it allows a teacher to maximize the effect and the benefit from the resources.
And I would, this is my personal opinion, is in the cases of surpluses and, you know, thriving economic conditions, I think most wouldn't have any problems with that. But, you know, the fact that we went to taxpayers for additional funding at a time, you know, people were struggling. So that's my issue with that.
I was in our school system when the AP switched to the smart boards, and I was in college when we switched to e-textbooks. And while I personally do not like using either of them to learn, my classmates, in terms of how we connected, how we learned everything changed. It became so much easier to do stuff. Like, you know, we use an e-textbook. Yeah, yay, we can highlight in it, we can draw circles, we can write notes, but I can send my information to a friend. That friend can, you know, make extra annotations. A professor who knows where we're all struggling can make annotations in it, and all of us get it instantly. The world is becoming more connected, and that's something we need to reflect in education, because this sort of collaborative work, this sort of collaborative learning, this sort of collaborative producing is what we're teaching our kids to do and what we need to teach kids to do, because that's where the world's going. And when we got the smart board, yeah, we all had fun with it for a little bit, but then we were able to use it for other things. We could have presentations going on it at the same time as learning. You can have, you know, you don't need, yeah, you can have a projector, you can have, heck, we still have the old school projectors, that's what I call them. The monochrome projectors. But, you know, that gives you limits. It's not interactive. You can't go up and have a program which teaches you, and we wrote one of these at the AP, a program that teaches you science. Because I can't go to Blackboard and write my answer and hope it comes back. But I can go to Smartboard, write my answer, have the Smartboard tell me where I'm wrong and why, so that I understand what I screwed up on. I understand how to improve myself for the next answers. And I understand that there's a cost analysis to it, and obviously that's an analysis to most, but with the way our society is moving and the way kids are learning and how we're interacting with each other, it's essentially, it allows the school to be a continuation of their actual personal life. And, you know, for people who live with technology 24/7, going to a chalkboard isn't going to help. We expect the same type of feedback we get from the internet. We expect to be able to say, oh, I screwed up, I don't know who Alexander is, and then, you know, have a listing suddenly come up of the famous Alexanders, which one are we looking at, here's more information on him. You know, that is beneficial, and I understand the tax part, but personally I think that is something that should be mainly focused on in terms of when we have some extra money in that area or that regard, because that is what kids need for the future.
And we're talking about college-age students and, you know, older students, that's great, but, you know, is that necessary at the K through, you know, 5 and 6 level? That's
That might be when we agree to disagree, but I'd say absolutely, you would be amazed with those kids.
not a value, I mean,
Yeah.
a value add as opposed to a necessity, that's what I meant.
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, yes, we're preparing kids for the 21st century, and, but again, that would be one we could try to talk a whole other session.
Think of it this way, your kids probably like Angry Birds or games like that. Those games on an iPad can be just as educational as anything else. You can use them. Yes, I know Angry Birds is not. But you know, there are physics games that teach you the basics of physics. There are science games, there are just flashcards on there. This stuff is, you know, you're updating it to the technology that the kids are literate in. Most kids don't know flashcards on paper anymore. We make them on the computer, whether there's a program for it or we make our own slideshow.
We have one more question and we got to kind of wrap up here.
Thank you. I've been studying Common Core now for a couple of years, and even though I am not in this school district, it is a concern of my own. So I have gotten on the national teleconferences. I've signed up and started learning more and more about it myself. I think for the most part, everyone's here, first of all, because most Ohioans did not even know that we passed Common Core when the state signed it. So now we're playing catch up. What is Common Core? I think, first of all, I commend everybody on the panel tonight for answering the questions so well and for doing an absolutely wonderful presentation for Common Core. I think, again, some of the conflicting information that we're getting are certainly huge concerns, and we do need to address those concerns. When one of the first questions was, how much input do the parents have? And you're a school board, the school board, and then the teaching administration, I guess, or the teachers are the ones that pretty much decide on the curriculum. I think the parents are concerned, like how much input, how much is their voice going to be heard, and will they be able to actually make changes? I think that's obviously a concern. The concern about data mining, things have already happened with the, you know, iris scanning in Florida for the kids that were getting the free meals. I mean, I guess as all these questions keep coming up, I think most of us just want straightforward answers. I want to highly suggest, I wish I would have been able to share this, and maybe whoever brunch or tea party here might be able to share it, but I think a really good source of seeing the pros and the cons of Common Core and how it will be implemented might be just going and looking at the debate on YouTube. It's on YouTube. And just pull it up. That way people can see both sides of it. They can see teachers on both sides of it. There's 3 on each panel. There's teachers, there's Andrew Brenner is one that is for Common Core, but then you get to see the politician on the opposite side. I think it would behoove everybody to take the time to really learn the pros and cons of Common Core, what's in the law, what's written in black and white, and then all that gray matter area, I mean, obviously leads us to, you know, meetings like this where we can just ask straight up questions. But I think it would benefit everyone to just, to see both sides of it, you know, to be able to, again, I guess I hate to say, take the hardline look at the pros and the cons. You guys have done a wonderful job, I will have to say here, from the superintendent. Thank you very much, too, for coming. This will be difficult because I think now the more and more that people are learning, the more concerned they are. about all that gray area. How much information can you, get for our kids? Are you going to steer them into certain careers? Are you going to, I don't know. There's a lot of repercussions about some of the data mining that is already currently taking place. There's all those questions. So I appreciate you taking the time. I think it's well worth looking up the debate. The debate was on August 22nd, and you get to see the pros and cons of Common Core set by the people that signed it as well. So.
Are you referring to a recent debate? Because I remember
April
going back to
22nd
March.
of
Or April,
2013.
right.
It's April 20, I'm pretty sure it's April 22nd or possibly the 29th. It's on YouTube and they've had a lot of hits. And obviously, people are just now educating ourselves. So I think it'll help get through a lot of these questions. Each person states where they're coming from, and then they all give their point of view, and it goes over all different, the one question was who came up with Common Core. That's one of the things discussed, how exactly, who all was involved in putting together Common Core, and obviously promoting that from the federal government into each state.
Yes, I'll second that. I was at that particular debate, and I agree that was a very good presentation. So we'll get it out there. If you're not find us on Facebook, like us, Worthington Tea Party. I also want to second the thanks to all of our presenters, and you can pass that on. and really, thanks for taking the time out, knowing that there may be some not so friendly questions. But really give you a lot of respect for you guys coming out to go over this with everybody. So I do want to invite you, if you'd like to be a part of our mailing list and are not, I have some 2 sign-up sheets in the back, so feel free, and thanks everybody for coming out.
And if you have additional questions that maybe you
Yes.
didn't feel comfortable asking tonight, please fill out
Put them on those cards,
and we'll get back with you. No problem.